Welcome to Sports by the Fire, a quiet place where the roar of the crowd fades and the stories behind the game come to life. Here, we don't rush. We sit back, breathe in, and let the fire do the talking. Whether it's a legendary comeback, a forgotten underdog, or the heartbeat of a hometown hero, each tale flickers and glows, just like the embers before you. So lean in, relax, and let the story unfold by the soft crackle of the fire. This is Sports by the Fire. Before there were slam dunks, sneaker deals and triple doubles, before the NBA was even the NBA, there were the New York Knicks. It was 1946. The world had just emerged from the shadows of World War II. Baseball ruled the American sports landscape, but a new idea was bouncing around, literally. Professional basketball, scrappy and unpolished, was trying to find its footing. In the middle of Manhattan, a man named Ned Irish saw an opportunity. Irish was a sports writer turned promoter. He loved basketball, especially the college game. And he'd already been packing Madison Square Garden with doubleheaders featuring the top college teams. But now he wanted more. He wanted a pro team in the heart of the sports capital of the world. So on June 6, 1946, the Basketball Association of America was born. The league that would eventually become the NBA. And Ned Irish founded one of its original teams, the New York Knickerbockers. Now, why the name Knickerbockers? It goes way back, to the early Dutch settlers of New York, whose baggy pants were called knickerbockers. It was quirky. It was classic New York. And in typical New York fashion, it was shortened almost instantly. Just call them the Knicks. Their first head coach was a sharp, serious guy named Joe Lapchick. Lapchick was a former star of the legendary original Celtics, one of the first great barnstorming teams. He brought credibility and structure to a brand new club in a brand new league. The first game the Knicks ever played wasn't even in New York. It was in Toronto on November 1st, 1946, against the Huskies. The Knicks won 68-66 in front of 7,000 curious Canadian fans. In fact, any fan taller than 6'8" got in free that night. That's how weird and new pro basketball was back then. The Knicks wore blue and orange, a nod to the Dutch heritage of New York, and they were good from the start. Not flashy, but disciplined, smart. Team-first basketball. Lapchick built his team around solid fundamentals and character guys. Carl Braun, a slick shooter and playmaker, was their first real star. Braun would play 13 seasons with the Knicks, becoming one of the faces of the franchise in the 40s and 50s. He wasn't flashy. He was dependable, steady and smart, averaging double digits in an era when that meant something. Then there was Dick McGuire, a true New York guy from the Bronx. McGuire had this uncanny court vision. He was one of the first true floor generals in NBA history. Watching him run the offense was like watching a conductor guide a symphony. And then, of course, there was Harry Gallatin, the Horse, a rugged forward who never missed a game in 9 seasons. In fact, from 1949 to 1957, he played in 610 straight games. No load management here. Gallatin was a rebounding machine. 7-time All-Star, Hall of Famer, and beloved by Knicks fans for his hustle and heart. From the late 40s into the early 50s, the Knicks were the class of the league. They made the playoffs their first 9 seasons. And between 1951 and 1953, they went to 3 straight NBA finals. But those championships? They slipped through their fingers. In 1951, they lost in 7 games to the Rochester Royals. The next year, the Lakers, with George McCann, the first true big man superstar, beat them in 7 again. And in 53, it was McCann and the Lakers once more. Still, the Knicks were respected. They played hard, smart, unselfish basketball, the kind of basketball New Yorkers love. They didn't have the flash of the Lakers or the dominance of McCann, but they had grit and unity, and they had the Garden. Ah, Madison Square Garden. By the late 40s, the Knicks had made it the place to be. It wasn't just about basketball. It was a scene. Celebrities, politicians, working-class fans, they all packed the old Garden on 8th Avenue. The Knicks were more than a team. They were a New York institution. There's a story. probably true, that on one night in 1952, Frank Sinatra and Jackie Gleason were spotted courtside at a Knicks game, nursing drinks and shouting advice to the refs. The Knicks may not have always won, but they belonged to the city. And yet, the team hit a wall in the late 50s. Lapchick stepped down in 1956 and the Knicks drifted into mediocrity. But the seeds were there. The loyalty of the fan base never wavered, even as the winds dried up. Behind the scenes, though, the league was changing. Integration was coming. The Knicks were slow to adapt, the last NBA team to sign an African-American player. That player was Nat Sweetwater Clifton in 1950, one of the first black players in the NBA and a Harlem Globetrotter legend. Sweetwater was a 6'8" forward with soft hands, a sweet jumper, and an even sweeter demeanor. He was beloved. Clifton's arrival wasn't just a basketball move, it was a cultural moment. The Knicks were stepping into a new era, just like the city itself. Then came Richie Guerin. Talk to any old-school Knicks fan, and they'll tell you, Richie was the man. A Bronx native, former Marine, and tough-as-nails guard, Guerin was the Knicks' heartbeat in the late 50s and early 60s. He averaged over 20 points per game and played with an edge, never backing down, never giving up. He was the kind of player who fit the city like a glove. But even with Guerin, the team struggled to find consistent success. Other franchises were evolving faster. The Celtics were building a dynasty. The Knicks were stuck. Still, the foundation had been laid, the identity forged. Grit, smarts, teamwork, and above all, New York pride. And the fans? They never gave up. Not when the shots stopped falling, not when the standings dipped. They came back, night after night, because being a Knicks fan wasn't about championships. It was about belonging. It was about showing up and believing that better days were always around the corner. In those early years, the Knicks created more than a basketball team. They created a culture, a vibe, a legacy. They didn't win the first title, or the second. But they built something bigger, a relationship with the city that would only grow deeper with time. And that's where the story really begins, because for the New York Knicks, the best chapters were still to come. When people talk about the greatest teams in NBA history, they mention the '96 Bulls, the Showtime Lakers, the Celtics dynasty. But there's one team that didn't just win. They defined what it meant to play beautiful, intelligent New York basketball. That team? The Knicks of the early 1970s. And their story begins not in a headline, but in the shadows, at the tail end of a losing decade. By the mid-'60s, the Knicks were stuck. Bad records, half-empty Madison Square Gardens. A far cry from the playoff squads of the early days. But change was coming, and it started at the very top. In 1967, the Knicks hired Red Holzman as head coach, a former player, a basketball lifer, and maybe most importantly, a man who understood New York. Holzman didn't preach flashy basketball. He believed in movement, defense, unselfishness, fundamentals. He wanted 5 players thinking as one. And then the pieces fell into place. Willis Reed, the quiet leader from Grambling State, had already arrived in 1964. Strong, stoic, and tough as granite. He wasn't just a center, he was the soul of the team. Teammates swore he could stare down fear itself. Then came the draft picks. In 1967, they selected Walt Clyde Frazier, a smooth, sharp-witted guard out of southern Illinois with a silky handle and a wardrobe that could light up Times Square. If Reed was the heart, Clyde was the style. 1968 brought slush Bill Bradley, a former Rhodes Scholar from Princeton, who turned down Oxford to pursue basketball. A thinking man's player with perfect footwork and a court IQ that felt like it belonged to a grandmaster. Add in Dave DeBusschere, a rugged forward and former MLB pitcher. He brought grit, rebounding, and tenacious defense. He was the kind of guy who'd dive into the first row to save a ball in the first quarter. Rounding out the core was Dick Barnett, with a jump shot that kicked both legs back like a springboard diver. Smooth, deadly, underappreciated. By 1969, this group was clicking. On defense, they were a wall. On offense, they moved the ball like it was on a string. There were no egos, just 5 minds working in sync. And then came the 1969-70 season. It started like a dream. They won 18 straight games in the fall, a franchise record. Fans packed Madison Square Garden like it was revival church. Something special was happening. Everyone could feel it. They finished with 60 wins, the best record in the league. Reed was the MVP. Frazier was blossoming into a star. The team was surgical, selfless, swaggering, and in the playoffs they brought that same energy. They beat the Baltimore Bullets in 7 grueling games, then handled Milwaukee and a young Lou Alcindor, who the world would soon know as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That set up the NBA Finals, Knicks versus the Los Angeles Lakers, a coast-to-coast showdown. The Lakers had legends, Wilt Chamberlain, Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, but the Knicks had something stronger, chemistry. The series was epic. Back and forth, blowouts, buzzer beaters, each game a battle. And then, Game 5. Midway through the first quarter, disaster struck. Willis Reed went down with a torn muscle in his thigh. The Garden fell silent. It was like watching Superman bleed. Without Reed, the Knicks still managed to win Game 5, behind Barnett's shooting and Clyde's floor leadership. But then the Lakers roared back in Game 6, blowing out New York. Series tied 3-3. 1 game left. Everything on the line. May 8th, 1970. Game 7. The Garden was a powder keg of nerves and hope. The Knicks were warming up, but no Reed. He wasn't supposed to play. The muscle tear was too serious. Trainers said no way. And then, just before tip-off, he emerged from the tunnel. Willis, Reed, limping, wincing, dragging that injured leg but standing tall. The crowd exploded. It was thunder. It was tears. It was belief. And then on his very first 2 shots, he sank them both. Swish, swish. That was all he needed to do. The rest? That was Clyde's show. Walt Frazier put on one of the greatest performances in NBA Finals history. 36 points, 19 assists and 7 rebounds. He controlled every moment of the game like a maestro. The Knicks ran the Lakers out of the building, 113-99. The New York Knicks were champions. Not just champions, beloved. They played the right way. They played together. They were thinkers, warriors, artists in motion. They weren't just a team. They were a model. And yet, they weren't done. The following years were a roller coaster. In 1971, they fell to the Bullets in the Eastern Finals. But in 1972, the Knicks added another piece. A dazzling scorer named Earl the Pearl Monroe. Now this was controversial. Earl had been the enemy, a Baltimore Bullet who terrorized the Knicks for years with his crossover and playground flair. Could he fit in with the team-first Knicks? Even Clyde had doubts. But Monroe adjusted. He gave up part of his game to win. He and Frazier became the Rolls-Royce backcourt, smooth, elegant, impossible to stop. In 1973, it all came together again. They stormed through the playoffs, dispatching the Bullets and Celtics, and once again facing the Lakers in the finals. This time, there was no drama. The Knicks beat LA in 5 games. Clyde was flawless. Reed, though still not 100%, earned Finals MVP. Bradley hit shot after shot. DeBusschere was a defensive wall. Monroe played with quiet brilliance. The Knicks were champions again. 2 titles in 4 years. A golden era. A team for the ages. But what made them so unforgettable wasn't just the wins. It was the way they won. No one averaged 30 a night. No one cared about headlines. They passed. They defended. They helped each other up. They played like they'd rather make the right play than the highlight play. And in New York, that matters. These guys walked among the people. Clyde signed autographs on subway platforms. Bill Bradley went into politics. Willis Reed stayed in the game as a coach and executive. DeBusschere scouted and mentored. They became more than players. They became legends. And still, decades later, you can hear the echoes. Anytime the Knicks show heart or ball movement or just a little swagger, fans whisper, "That's how the 70 team did it." Because that team meant something. They were the blueprint. They were what the Garden was built to house. Not just stars, but men. Tough, thoughtful, team-first men who gave everything to the game. and to the city. And so, when you walk through Madison Square Garden today, past the rafters, the old banners, the retired jerseys, you feel it. The ghosts of Clyde and Willis, Earl the Pearl, the Princeton professor, the Marine, the horse, Red with his clipboard and his wry smile. They aren't gone. They're just waiting for the next Knicks team to rise and carry the torch they lit all those years ago. The 1970s gave Knicks fans poetry in motion. Team-first brilliance, selfless champions, and Madison Square Garden as the epicenter of basketball elegance. But time is undefeated. Dynasties fade. Legends retire. And when the golden era ended, New York basketball entered its most demanding test yet. Not just in wins and losses, but in character, in grit, in identity. This is the story of the New York Knicks from the late 1970s through the 1990s, an era that never quite reached the summit again, but instead carved its own kind of greatness, forged in toughness, rivalry, loyalty, and unrelenting heart. The post-championship Knicks struggled to redefine themselves. After the retirement of Willis Reed and the slow dissolution of the championship core, the team spiraled into mediocrity. Draft misfires and poor front office decisions compounded the problem. The franchise was adrift. But as the 1980s dawned, a singular event changed everything. 1985. The NBA Draft Lottery. In what would become one of the most controversial and speculated moments in NBA history, the Knicks won the first ever draft lottery and landed the #1 pick. The prize? Patrick Ewing, a 7-foot Jamaican-born center out of Georgetown, a national champion, an All-American, and the most hyped big man since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The Knicks finally had their cornerstone. Ewing's impact was immediate. Despite injuries limiting him in his rookie year, he was named NBA Rookie of the Year, showcasing his silky mid-range jumper, shot-blocking instincts, and competitive fire. For the first time in a decade, the Knicks had someone to believe in. And belief matters in New York. The late 1980s were a grind. The team saw flashes of brilliance, Ewing making all-star games, playing through pain, carrying rosters held together by duct tape and desire. But the Knicks needed more than just talent. They needed an identity, a philosophy, a culture. That arrived in 1991, in the form of a scowling man with slicked back hair, an Armani suit, and a reputation for turning grit into greatness. Pat Riley. Yes, that Pat Riley. Architect of the Showtime Lakers, bearer of 4 championship rings, master of basketball glamour. But Riley's Knicks were no Hollywood act. He came to New York and re-engineered his brand. The Knicks under Riley weren't about finesse. They were about fury, defense, physicality, psychological warfare. Riley built his team in Ewing's image. Relentless, tough, unyielding. He installed a defense-first system that demanded sacrifice and accountability. And he surrounded Ewing with soldiers. Charles Oakley, the human brick wall and enforcer supreme. Anthony Mason, a walking mismatch with the attitude of a nightclub bouncer. John Starks, a firebrand shooting guard who went undrafted, bagged groceries, and now stood toe-to-toe with the league's elite. These Knicks were not just respected. They were feared. And the Garden? It became a fortress again. On any given night, you might see Spike Lee barking from the front row, celebrities in fur coats, Wall Street titans and Bronx lifers screaming in unison as the Knicks turned every game into a street fight. The Eastern Conference in the 1990s was a war zone. Michael Jordan's Bulls, Reggie Miller's Pacers, the bruising Heat, the bad boy Pistons. There were no easy nights, no shortcuts. The Knicks thrived in the chaos. In 1993, they reached the Eastern Conference Finals against the Chicago Bulls. Game 2, Ewing blocks Jordan's layup, Starks drives baseline, elevates, and dunks over Horace Grant and a late-coming Jordan. It was the dunk, an explosion of defiance, rage, and New York swagger. But the Bulls were relentless. Jordan was Jordan. And once again, the Knicks fell short. In 1994, though, Jordan retired. The door cracked open. The Knicks saw light. They clawed through the playoffs, beating the Nets, then the Charles Barkley-led Suns, and then took down the Indiana Pacers in a brutal 7-game series. Madison Square Garden was electric. The NBA Finals awaited. Their opponent, Hakeem Olajuwon and the Houston Rockets. It was a slugfest. Two titanic centers, Ewing and Olajuwon, battling in the post like ancient gods. Defense suffocated offense. Every possession felt like life and death. Game 5 became legendary, but for all the wrong reasons. As the Knicks fought for a critical win, NBC cut away to live coverage of the O.J. Simpson Ford Bronco chase. The game was literally split-screened with a murder investigation, only in the 90s. The series went 7, and in Game 7, the Knicks fell short by just 6 points. Ewing had a finals record 30 blocks in the series, but it wasn't enough. Still, the Knicks had arrived. They were title contenders. They were playing for something bigger than trophies. They were carrying the hopes of a city craving glory. The next season brought heartbreak. Game 1 of the Eastern semifinals versus Indiana. Knicks lead by 6 with seconds remaining. And then Reggie Miller happened. 8 points. 9 seconds. Stole the inbound. Nailed the 3. Another steal. Another dagger. A stunned silence fell over the Garden. But that was the 1990s Knicks. They didn't fold. They just got tougher. In 1996, Pat Riley left for Miami. He took his defensive ethos with him and built a new rival in South Beach. The Knicks, under coach Jeff Van Gundy, became even grittier. More New York. Less flash. More grind. Van Gundy was a former assistant, undersized and often underestimated, but he had the full respect of his players. He knew every assignment, every angle, every nuance of the game. He once latched onto Alonzo Mourning's leg during a brawl. Not to fight, just to hold him back. That's who he was. By 1999, the NBA was in a lockout-shortened season. Ewing was aging. Starks was gone. Mason was traded. It felt like the window had closed. But New York doesn't go quietly. That season, the Knicks barely squeaked into the playoffs as the 8th seed. No one gave them a shot. But they stunned the league. First, they upset the number 1 seeded Miami Heat in 5 games. Allen Houston's floating jumper in the final seconds sealed it. Swish, redemption. Then they swept Atlanta, then beat Indiana. They were back in the finals. The 1999 finals against the San Antonio Spurs were bittersweet. Patrick Ewing was injured. The team was led by Latrell Sprewell, Houston, Marcus Camby, and Larry Johnson. They played with heart, but the Spurs, Twin Towers, Tim Duncan and David Robinson, were too much. The Knicks lost the series, but they made history. The first 8 seed to reach the finals. A defiant last stand for a generation of basketball warriors. And here's the truth. The Knicks of the 80s and 90s never won a title. But they earned something just as enduring. Respect. They made defense cool. They made grit glamorous. They stood nose to nose with greatness and never blinked. And Patrick Ewing? He walked off the floor without a ring, but with the admiration of an entire city. He bled orange and blue, game after game, year after year. He never asked for excuses, only the ball. To this day, when you hear the name Ewing, you don't just think of stats. You think of loyalty, leadership, legacy. The Knicks of this era taught fans how to believe, how to fight, how to love a team for more than championships. They weren't just players. They were gladiators, architects of identity, guardians of the Garden. And when you walk through that arena, you can still hear them. The roar after Stark's dunk, the thud of Oakley's screen, the steel resolve in Ewing's eyes. It wasn't always pretty, but it was always real. Because in New York, that's what matters most. New York is a city of dreams and of defiance. By the year 2000, the Knicks were no longer the perennial contenders of the 90s. Patrick Ewing, the warrior who had carried the team for 15 years, was traded to Seattle in a move that left fans divided, heartbroken, and unsure of what came next. The 1999 finals felt like a last stand, and as the new century rolled in, so did a long, unpredictable wilderness. The Knicks still played at Madison Square Garden. The fans still roared. But the magic, it flickered. A franchise once defined by discipline and grit was suddenly bouncing between rebuilds, big-name signings, and head-scratching decisions. The front office swung for stars. They brought in Stephon Marbury, a Brooklyn native, a prodigy, a player who wanted to be a Knick. And for a while it felt right. Marbury could score in bunches, electrify the Garden, and deliver the kind of swagger fans craved. But success didn't follow. There were flashes, like Jamal Crawford's jaw-dropping crossover, or Allen Houston's silky jumper still finding nets in the early 2000s. But the foundation wasn't there. Coaches came and went. Larry Brown lasted just one season. The team tried rebuilding and reloading at the same time. Then came the Isaiah Thomas era. A Knicks legend as a player, but as president and coach, his tenure was turbulent. Big contracts piled up. Trades for aging stars didn't pan out. And worse, the organization was soon mired in controversy and dysfunction off the court. By 2008, the Knicks were not just struggling, they were lost. And yet, every night, fans still filled the Garden. They wore their jerseys, held their breath, booed, cheered, and hoped. Because being a Knicks fan was never just about winning. It was about belonging. Then, out of nowhere, something beautiful happened. February 2012. The team was once again floundering, riddled with injuries, desperation, exhaustion. And then Jeremy Lin, an undrafted point guard from Harvard, sleeping on his brother's couch, stepped onto the floor and rewrote history. No one expected it. Not the coaching staff, not the league, not even Lin himself. But over the course of a few breathtaking weeks, Linsanity took over the basketball world. Lin dropped 25 points and 7 assists against the Nets, then 28 against the Jazz, then 38 against Kobe Bryant and the Lakers on national television. The Garden was reborn, alive in a way it hadn't been in a decade. It wasn't just about the numbers. It was about joy, passion, improbability. Lin played like someone who had nothing to lose, and the fans responded like they had everything to gain. For a few fleeting weeks, Knicks basketball was fun again. And even when the Linsanity era ended, abruptly and maybe prematurely, it reminded the world that the Garden could still be a cathedral, that the Knicks still mattered. But the franchise wasn't done trying. Just 1 year earlier, in 2011, the Knicks had pulled off the biggest move in years, a trade for Carmelo Anthony, born in Brooklyn, raised in Red Hook and Baltimore, a scoring machine with a silky jumper and big-market charisma. He was already a star in Denver, but New York needed someone to build around. Melo's arrival brought hope and pressure. Expectations soared. With Amari Stoudemire already in place and Tyson Chandler patrolling the paint, the Knicks finally had a foundation that felt right. A big three. A real shot. The 2012-2013 season was the high point. Mike Woodson at the helm. Jason Kidd providing veteran leadership, J.R. Smith letting it fly. Steve Novak with the three-point salute, Rasheed Wallace yelling even when he wasn't playing. And Melo? He was unreal. He led the league in scoring, 28.7 points per game. He scored 50 on the Heat without taking a shot in the paint. He dropped 62 at the Garden against Charlotte, a Knicks record. It was pure artistry, and the team won. 54 games. Their best record in 16 years. They clinched the Atlantic Division and rolled past the Celtics in the first round of the playoffs. Finally, it seemed, the Knicks were back. But then came Indiana. Game after game, the offense stalled, the defense slipped. Paul George emerged as a rising star. Roy Hibbert met Melo at the rim and turned away a potential series-saving dunk. The Knicks fell in 6. It wasn't heartbreak like 94 or 99. It was quieter. Emptier, a window that closed too soon. Still, for that one season, New York had felt whole again. Carmelo Anthony played with pride. He never ducked the moment, never ran from the noise. He wanted to wear the Knicks jersey. And through years of roster turnover, coaching changes and criticism, he stayed. He gave his best years to the city. And even when the team fell back into chaos, he never made excuses. Melo's legacy in New York is complicated. But real Knicks fans know he carried the weight of the franchise with grace. He gave us hope in a hopeless decade. And for that, he'll always be part of the Garden. As the 2010s wore on, the Knicks once again cycled through rebuilds. Coaches came and went: Mike D'Antoni, Mike Woodson, Derek Fisher, Jeff Hornacek, David Fizdale. None could recapture the magic, and yet hope lingered. Kristaps Porzingis arrived in 2015, booed on draft night by fans who had never seen a Latvian seven-footer with a jumper like Dirk. But the unicorn won them over. He could block shots, shoot threes, and fly down the lane like a wing. He gave the franchise a future, until he didn't. Porzingis was traded in 2019 in a stunning deal that cleared cap space and left fans stunned once again. It seemed like the Knicks couldn't catch a break. Every time a spark lit up the Garden, it fizzled. The roster never stabilized. The front office kept reshuffling. Even the fans, loyal, passionate, enduring, started to wonder if the Knicks would ever matter again. But through it all, they showed up. You see, Knicks fans don't root for convenience. They root for identity. It's the father and daughter in Section 212 who never miss a game. The kid in Queens with a Starks jersey and a Nerf hoop. The bar in Brooklyn erupting during a meaningless January win over the Hornets. It's Spike Lee, night after night, no matter the record. Because the Knicks aren't just a team, they're a feeling. A symbol of what could be if just one or two things fall into place. That's the magic of the Garden. It never forgets, and it never gives up. As the decade ended, the franchise began laying the groundwork for something new. A front office overhaul, new scouting departments, patience, draft picks, player development. It wasn't sexy, but it felt different. For the first time in years, the Knicks seemed to be learning from their past, not repeating it. Because here's the thing, no matter how many seasons fall short, or how many rebuilds sputter, or how many trade rumors swirl, the Knicks never go away. Their history is embedded in the court, in the banners, in the hardwood that remembers Clyde's steals, Ewing's blocks, Melo's fadeaways, and Jeremy Lin's miracles. Their fans don't want perfection. They want purpose. And through the darkest years, the chaos, the dysfunction, the rebuilds that turned into reruns, the Garden kept echoing. It echoed with memory, with loyalty, with belief. Because one day, those echoes will become a roar. The New York Knicks have always been more than a basketball team. They've been a mirror of the city they call home. Unpredictable, gritty, hopeful, flawed, and forever resilient. By the time the 2020s arrived, the Knicks had wandered through 2 decades of frustration. They'd cycled through draft picks, superstar pursuits, regime changes, and too many rebuilds to count. Yet somehow the Garden never lost its soul. You could still walk into Madison Square Garden on a random Tuesday in February and feel it. The tension, the buzz, the dream waiting to wake up. And in 2020, it started to stir. That year, amid a global pandemic and an NBA season disrupted like never before, the Knicks quietly began to transform. They hired Leon Rose, a respected agent with deep ties across the league, as president of basketball operations. They brought in Worldwide Wes, a mythic figure in basketball circles, as a whisperer behind the curtain, and they hired a coach who would change everything, Tom Thibodeau. Thibs didn't care about headlines. He didn't do drama. What he did do, work, intensity, accountability. He brought back Knicks basketball. The 2020-2021 season was supposed to be another bridge year. No one outside New York expected much. But inside the locker room, something clicked. Julius Randle, a player once viewed as a role piece, took a quantum leap. He became the heart of the team, a point forward, a leader, a workhorse who played every night like it mattered. Because to him, it did. Then came R.J. Barrett, just 20 years old, growing into his game. Quiet, focused, fearless. The son of a coach, a Canadian kid with New York toughness in his veins. There was Emmanuel Quickley, a rookie drafted late in the first round, who lit up the Garden with floaters and fearlessness. Derrick Rose, resurrected as a steadying veteran presence, leading not with flash, but with wisdom. And most of all, there was defense. Communication, heart, pride. The Knicks finished 41-31, their best record in 8 years. They were the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference, and the Garden, it exploded back to life. It had been 8 long years since the playoffs last echoed through those walls. Now, with fans allowed back in limited capacity, the Garden roared like it was the finals. That first home playoff game against Atlanta felt like a release. Years of bottled-up emotion suddenly unleashed. Spike Lee danced. Fans chanted in unison. The Knicks were back. They lost the series in 5 games. But it didn't matter, because something had changed. This wasn't false hope. This wasn't selling a star that never arrived. This was earned. A foundation built from the ground up. And then came Jalen Brunson. In 2022, the Knicks made their biggest free agent signing in years, and arguably their best. Brunson had been overlooked for most of his career. Too short, too slow, a second-round pick. But in Dallas, he had blossomed quietly into a leader, a shot maker, a playoff assassin. When he arrived in New York, he didn't ask for the spotlight. He took it. Brunson brought calm to the storm, poise in the 4th quarter. He wasn't flashy, he was clinical. A mid-range maestro, always under control, always 2 moves ahead. He played the way Knicks fans have always loved, with craft, courage, and 0 excuses. In 2023, he helped lead the Knicks back to the 2nd round of the playoffs, their deepest run in a decade. They knocked off the Cavaliers in the 1st round with a gritty, physical brand of basketball that felt like a throwback. Madison Square Garden was once again the center of the basketball universe. Game 3, the Garden was so loud it rattled. Celebrities and construction workers stood shoulder to shoulder, chanting for the blue and orange. And though they fell to the Miami Heat in the next round, it was clear the Knicks were not a punchline anymore. They were a problem, and they weren't done. Josh Hart came in mid-season. A Thibs guy, all hustle and rebounds and heart. The kind of player who dives for a loose ball like it's Game 7, even if it's Game 37. And fans loved him. Mitchell Robinson, the defensive anchor. Quentin Grimes, a 2-way guard who guarded the league's best and knocked down threes. Obi Toppin, a human highlight reel from Brooklyn who brought the Garden to its feet every time he took flight. The team was young, talented, hungry. And in 2024, they took another leap. Brunson cemented himself as an all-star. Julius Randle once doubted, silenced critics again. The Knicks looked like a team on the verge, and through all of it, the ups, the playoff exits, the injuries, the culture held strong. No drama, no shortcuts, just work. The Knicks had finally found something every team searches for, an identity. Defense, ball movement, toughness, trust, a culture players want to be part of. And so the story continues. Because this generation of Knicks isn't about living in the past. They honor it. They feel it in the hardwood, in the banners, in the echoes of Clyde and Ewing and Starks. But they're writing something new. And Knicks fans, they feel it too. There's a new generation in the stands now. Kids who don't remember the 90s but wear the jerseys anyway. Teenagers who saw Jalen Brunson carve up the league and decided this was their team. Lifelong fans bringing their kids to the Garden, passing the torch. This is how the Knicks survive, not on banners alone, but on connection. Because the Garden isn't just an arena, it's a cathedral. It remembers everything. It remembers Clyde's defense, Reed's limp, Starks' dunk, Melo's 62, Lynn's 38, Houston's floater, Brunson's brilliance. It remembers the pain too, the missed layups, the Game 7s, the draft night boos, the maybe next years. But that's what makes the highs sweeter, the hope more meaningful. Because if there's one thing the Knicks have taught us, it's this. The story's never over. The next banner isn't just a dream, it's a promise, waiting to be fulfilled. Maybe by Brunson, maybe by someone not here yet, maybe by a team we haven't imagined, but will one day never forget. The Knicks have always been chasing something bigger than wins. They're chasing moments. Moments that live forever, that fathers tell sons about, that grandmothers watch from faded living rooms in Queens, that reverberate through the subways, the corner dailies, the apartment hallways of New York. Moments that belong to all of us. So whether it's your first game or your thousandth, whether you grew up on Frazier, Ewing or Brunson, whether you cheer from Section 100 or a smartphone halfway across the world, if you believe in toughness, in loyalty, in rising again no matter how many times you fall, then you're already part of the story. Because the Knicks aren't just a team, they're New York. And the next chapter, it's just getting started.